Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I am Muneeb Hamid with the news of this hour. Let's begin with the headlines first. The Afghan government says 8 of its soldiers have been killed in a Taliban attack on a checkpost in northern Balkh province. A provincial governor spokesperson said 4 others were injured in the attack in Shahi district. However, the Taliban claimed to have killed 12 government soldiers and seized a large number of weapons and ammunition. China says the US has created trouble in the world by interfering in other countries. Speaking at his annual news conference, Foreign Minister Wang Yi said Beijing hopes Washington will remove all unreasonable restrictions on cooperation as soon as possible. He called on the US to remove what he called unjustified sanctions on Iran. Tens of thousands of people have taken to the streets across Myanmar in one of the biggest days of protests against the military coup. Police fired tear gas and stun grenades to break up the protests in the country's northern Shan district. The latest demonstrations come despite security forces' overnight raids on protest leaders in the main city of Yangon. The Arab coalition says it has destroyed 10 drones launched by Yemen's Houthis to target the southern part of Saudi Arabia. State media said the drones were intercepted before they could cause any damage on the ground. Houthi strikes against Saudi targets have increased in recent days amid ramped-up international efforts to end the Yemen war. Mexico has reported nearly 800 new coronavirus deaths in a day, with its toll surging to over 190,000. Meanwhile, US President Joe Biden has hailed giant step as Senate passes $1.9 trillion coronavirus relief bill. Pakistan has reported nearly 1,800 cases and 39 fatalities overnight, with the death toll crossing 13,200. While globally, the virus has claimed over 2.58 million lives and infected more than 116 million people so far. And in tennis, Hungary's Martin Fucsovics beats Croatian Bona Koric 6-4 and 6-1 in the semi-finals of the Rotterdam Open, while Russia's Andrei Rublev defeated Greek star Stefanos Tsitsipas 6-3 and 7-6. Fucsovics will clash with Andrei Rublev in the final today. These are the top stories. News in detail after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Now let's have the news in detail. We'll start from Afghanistan, where the government says 8 of its soldiers have been killed in a Taliban attack on a checkpost in northern Balkh province. A provincial governor spokesperson said 4 others were injured in the attack in Shahi district. However, the Taliban claimed to have killed 12 government soldiers in the attack. In a statement, Taliban spokesperson Zabihullah Mujahid said a large number of weapons and ammunition were also recovered. Now, this comes the day after US envoy Zalmay Khalilzad met Taliban leader Abdul Ghani Baradar in Doha. They discussed the ways to speed up the Afghan peace process. Earlier, Afghan President Ashraf Ghani said he is ready to discuss holding fresh elections to advance talks with the Taliban. Now, China says the US has created trouble in the world by interfering in other countries. Foreign Minister Wang Yi said this while speaking at his annual news conference. Wang said Beijing hopes Washington will remove all unreasonable restrictions on cooperation as soon as possible. He added the two sides must advocate healthy competition and not zero-sum finger-pointing. But he warned that there is no room for compromise on the issue of Taiwan. He called on the US to remove what he called unjustified sanctions on Iran. The foreign minister said Iran needs to take on responsibility in the process too. Meanwhile, tens of thousands of people have taken to the streets across Myanmar in one of the biggest days of protests against the military coup. Police fired tear gas and stun grenades to break up the protest in the country's northern Shan region. In Mandalay, activists staged a sit-in protest after 2 minutes of silence to honor the people killed by police and the army. The latest demonstrations come despite security forces' overnight raids on protest leaders in the main city of Yangon. Locals said the force arrested 3 people for unknown reason. Meanwhile, China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi said Beijing is ready to engage with relevant parties to ease the situation in the country. Now, in India, another farmer has committed suicide at the Delhi border in protest against the centre's controversial agricultural laws. Nearly 250 growers have died during the anti-farm laws protest since November 26. Police said the victim, who belonged to northern Haryana state, hung himself from a tree. Meanwhile, the Farmer Union has announced to continue the protest and strengthen the movement. It said that every village should provide 1 tractor and 15 men for 10 days on a rotation basis. However, a Sikh leader in the UK has called for UN observers to monitor the protest sites and report on abuses on human rights. Now, the Arab coalition says it has destroyed 10 drones launched by Yemen's Houthis to target the southern part of Saudi Arabia. Coalition spokesperson Colonel Turki al-Maliki says the drones were intercepted before they could cause any damage. He said the coalition has destroyed multiple aircraft that the group deliberately launched towards civilians. Al-Maliki said the coalition is working to protect civilians in accordance with international humanitarian laws. Yesterday, the coalition said Houthis conducted 8 such strikes in 24 hours. Houthi strikes against Saudi targets have increased in recent days amid ramped-up international efforts to end the war in Yemen. Meanwhile, 3 Palestinian fishermen have reportedly been killed in an explosion off the coast of the Gaza Strip. The Palestinian media is blaming Israel for the incident. The nature of the explosion is not yet known. In a social media post, Israel's defense forces have denied involvement in the incident. IDF said there were indications that the deaths were caused by an explosion. Earlier, the Israeli Navy opened fire at Palestinian fishermen sailing off the Gaza city, forcing them to return to the shore. Also, thousands of Israelis hit the streets for 37th consecutive week in protest against Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The nationwide anti-Netanyahu protests kicked off bigger and louder than usual, with the elections fast approaching. Protesters rallied outside Netanyahu's residence in Jerusalem, calling for his resignation over his ongoing criminal trial. Demonstrators also gathered at some 550 central junctions, squares and bridges across the country. Famed Israeli activists, artists and lecturers also joined the protests in order to show their support. Israel's state media said Prime Minister's supporters attacked demonstrators in Jerusalem. Now, Netanyahu is facing severe public anger over the government's handling of the pandemic and his ongoing trial in court. However, he categorically denies the charges of corruption and fraud leveled against him. Now, Pope Francis has received a warm welcome from residents of the Iraqi town of Karakosh. Francis is visiting the historic cities during his 4-day tour of the country. Waving olive branches, flags and dressed in traditional robes, hundreds of residents lined the streets to welcome Pope Francis. He visited Iraq's largest Grand Immaculate Church in Karakosh. Earlier, the Pope visited Mosul, where he led a prayer of suffrage for war victims at Hosh al-Biya. He also met with Kurdish leaders after his arrival in Erbil this morning. The Pope's visit to his historical cities aims to boost the morale of the country's small Christian communities. Now moving to Senegal, where another protester has been killed in clashes with police during the demonstrations against President Macky Sall. At least 5 people have died in protests sparked by the arrest of Senegal's most prominent opposition leader, Ousmane Sonko. Violent clashes between police and opposition supporters continued in the capital, Dakar, and elsewhere. Military officials said protesters burned down a police station in Diobe, while ransacked another 6 across the country. Meanwhile, the opposition coalition has called for 3 days of nationwide protests beginning on Monday. In a statement, the Movement for Defense of Democracy urged people to massively descend on the streets. Earlier, the 15-nation Economic Community of West African states called for all parties to exercise restraint. Now, Lebanon's caretaker Prime Minister Hassan Diab says the country is heading towards chaos as the currency continues to collapse. In a televised speech, Diab threatened to stop working to pressure politicians to form a new government. He urged the politicians to put aside their differences in order to form a government that can attract foreign help. The caretaker premier said the financial and political situation is severely straining the country. Meanwhile, protests against the financial crisis continue in Lebanon as the army tried to maintain law and order in Beirut. Demonstrators blocked various roadways across the country for the 5th day in a row. Diab's cabinet resigned following last year's Beirut port explosion. Moving on now, Turkey says it's open to talk with Greece to solve the Eastern Mediterranean dispute through talks in line with international law. Defense Minister Hulusi Akar made the remarks during the Blue Homeland tactical exercise on the Uruk raise of the Aegean Sea. He said Ankara is in favor of having good neighborly relations with Athens. Akar said despite this, Greece continues with provocative attempts, actions and irresponsible statements. The Defense Minister said Greece does so to negatively affect the European Union and international public opinion and to mislead them. Akar also called Egypt's decision to respect Turkey's continental shelf in the Mediterranean an important development. He continued by signaling that a positive step may lead to different developments in the near future. Now, in Thailand, hundreds of demonstrators have gathered in the capital, Bangkok, to demand the release of protest leaders from jail. They rallied outside a criminal court defying an order banning public gatherings in the city. A few protesters burned photographs of the king and called for ending the strict royal insult law. Earlier, police warned protesters that they risk being arrested and threatened harsher measures. In a podcast, Prime Minister Prayuth Chan-o-cha also urged citizens to respect the law. The youth-led political movement rose up last year, calling for the Premier's resignation and reforms of the monarchy. More news coming up in this news bulletin after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Now, let's move on with the news stories. Mexico has reported nearly 800 new coronavirus deaths in a day, while its toll has surged to over 190,000. Globally, the virus has claimed over 2.58 million lives and infected more than 116 million people so far. More on the pandemic in this report. Other than physical damages, the virus has been testing nerves of both public and the government. From protests to resignations, pandemic-related issues have been equally active as the disease itself. In Paraguay, President has asked all cabinet ministers to resign following clashes at protests against the government's handling of the COVID-19 crisis. In the U.S. Senate, the all-night session saw Democrats battling among themselves over jobless aid and the Republican minority failing to push through some 3 dozen amendments to the relief bill. But finally, Biden was happy that with his coronavirus aid bill, $1,400 payments to most Americans will start to go out this month.
When we took office 45 days ago, I promised the American people that help was on the way. Today, I can say we've taken one more giant step forward in delivering on that promise that help is on the way.
Over in Europe, passengers flying indirectly to Portugal and Britain or Brazil will have to quarantine for 2 weeks upon arrival. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson says the reopening of the schools to all pupils on Monday will mark the first step back towards normality. Ireland reached the milestone of 500,000 coronavirus jabs administered. Meanwhile, hundreds of thousands of people in northern France went back into lockdown. French experts say around half of the health workers in the country's care homes do not want to be vaccinated.
ce virus qui est violent.
This virus is brutal and the toughness of our sector has shown. The vaccine adds to all this. And today, it's not that we want to say we don't want to get the vaccine, we don't want to protect ourselves or the residents. It's just that we have completely lost trust in the government.
After no new local COVID-19 cases, New Zealand marked a full week of no community transmissions across the country. Neighbouring Australia also had no local COVID-19 cases, making it the 37th day of no infections this year.
Meanwhile, in Pakistan, 39 more people have died from the novel coronavirus, bringing the country's death count to 13,205. The Health Ministry confirmed 1,780 cases overnight. The total number of infections so far has surpassed 590,000. The ministry said more than 559,000 of these people have recovered from the disease. It said the number of active cases has jumped to over 18,000. Meanwhile, nearly 1,600 patients are in critical condition. Now, at least one passenger has died and 40 others are injured after a train derailed near Pakistan's port city of Karachi. The train was going to Lahore from Karachi when 9 of its bogies derailed near Sangi railway station. Army and Ranger troops along with engineers were moved to the incident site immediately for rescue and relief efforts. The timely deployment of troops ensured safety of the passengers and their luggage. The injured people have been moved to a hospital where most of them are in critical condition. Officials say the rescue operation has been completed and now officials are working to open the track for trains. Moving to Sri Lanka, where the Catholic churches are observing Black Sunday, demanding justice for victims of the 2019 Easter attacks. More than 290 people were killed and nearly 500 others were injured in the terror attacks on 3 hotels and as many churches. The church leaders made the protest call, saying the inquiry report failed to name the perpetrators of the attacks. Across the country, parishioners of Catholic churches attended Sunday services dressed in black. The Bishops' Conference said the colour will signify the community's anger over the failure to ensure justice for the victims. A special prayer in remembrance of the victims was recited after Sunday Mass. Now, the United States and South Korea are set to conduct their springtime joint military exercise this week. However, the drill will be scaled back due to the coronavirus pandemic. South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff said the 9-day computer-simulated command post exercise will begin on Monday. In a statement, he said both sides decided to proceed with the drills after comprehensively considering the COVID-19 situation. He added the exercises are defensive in nature. The drills will not include outdoor maneuvers and the number of troops and equipment will be minimized. Meanwhile, North Korea says it is closely monitoring the combined drills and calls them a rehearsal for war. Now, over 150 pairs of buffaloes have participated in a traditional annual race in India. The southern Indian coastal city of Mangalore hosted the festival. Let's find out in this report.
Kambala is popular among rural masses and generally takes place in wet rice fields. Buffaloes run in the field one by one, and the winning pair of buffaloes is rewarded with a cash prize. However, traditionally, it is a non-competitive sport. The race is usually marked by the end of the harvest season in the region.
There is a matter of prestige more than anything else. It is matter of prestige, it is matter of tradition, it is matter of culture for us. That is why this Kambala is getting this sort of a support.
The rural festival was banned for 3 years after activists petitioned in court against animal cruelty concerns. The ban was lifted in 2017.
Now, in France, a street sweeper is using TikTok to spread the message of cleanliness. The 45-year-old was fed up with the people throwing litter on the ground in the COVID-19 pandemic. More in this report.
Paris resident Ludovic Francesquet has gone viral after he started using TikTok to urge people to put their litter in the garbage cans. The street sweeper has been posting time-lapse videos of him sweeping up piles of trash. He mixes dancing and heartfelt appeals to call on his fellow Parisians to keep the city clean.
Allez-y.
I made videos as a garbage collector. It got 100 likes. I said, wow, let's try to go further. And then I realized it reaches the young generation. And in my head, it clicked right away. I said, okay, I'll do before and after videos. We'll try to encourage people to do this profession because we are not immortal. I hope there will be people to take over and continue this beautiful work that we do around the world.
The Frenchman's TikTok account has 59,000 followers and around 608,000 likes. He has previously worked as a caregiver for cancer patients and autistic adults, but he says garbage collecting is his true calling.
When I was little and doing grocery shopping with my mother, walking on the streets, I was picking up paper bags from the street, and she would say, "My son, that's disgusting. What are you doing?" And I would say, "I know it's disgusting, but it's important for the planet."
With cafes and diners closed, many people are eating takeaway in public squares, increasing the volume of trash on the streets. But Francis Chest is doing his best to clean the streets and is pursuing his dream of making the planet a better place to live in.
Now, Britain has called on the European Union to shake off its ill will and build a good relationship as sovereign equals. In an opinion article, UK's top EU advisor David Frost promised to stand up for the country's interests. Frost defended Britain's extension of a grace period for checks on food products import to Northern Ireland as being lawful. He said the decision is consistent with the progressive and good faith implementation of the Northern Ireland Protocol. He added Britain will continue discussions with the EU to constructively resolve difficulties arising from the protocol. Both London and Brussels accuse each other of acting in bad faith in relation to the Northern Ireland Protocol. Now, China's exports have grown at a record pace from a year earlier despite the pandemic and Lunar New Year holiday. Customs data showed the exports skyrocketed over 154% in February compared with a year earlier. Moreover, China's foreign trade increased significantly in January and February. China's trade surplus jumped to over $103 billion for the first 2 months. In a statement, the customs said a rebound in foreign demand drove the surge. It said, in addition, a majority of manufacturing employees in China chose to stay put over the Lunar New Year holidays. And now let's have a look at the weather updates from around the world. And that is all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus.News. Take care.